um, much needed. So have a lot on our agenda today. Next on our agenda um, is our superintendent's report. Superintendent Dixon, are you ready to present?
I am ready, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you, board members. We're coming off of a great legislative session, albeit it was a bit strange in terms of protocols and just the way we operate. We did have the opportunity to have a lot of virtual meetings, and I don't think I was at the Capitol more than maybe 7 times for in-person meetings, but we had good relationships with our legislators, and we're able to push the board's mission forward. So today we're going to talk about one of the outcomes, in particular early learning, and how important it is to continue to support our strategic plan. We found that all of our discussions centered on our strategic plan, and we were able to really talk about our 4 goals. So today we want to highlight early learning, and I'll start by just referencing back to the mission. And really, I want to pop out how we define equity a little bit. So remember that when we adopted this mission, a lot of work went into it, and we really focused on equitable conditions. And we wanted those conditions to really play out in terms of what the board does, how we do our work. So the vision is where we're trying to get to. The mission is how we go about that. So equitable, we're leading out by creating conditions, equitable conditions for student success. And we do that by advocating for necessary resources, developing policy, and providing effective oversight and support. And that includes technical assistance, which we'll learn more about today. We also have a board adopted definition of equity. We've heard that discussed already today in a number of ways, and people have their versions of what equity means, but we operate as staff on the board adopted definition of equity, which is it's the equitable distribution of resources based upon each individual student's needs. Equitable resources include funding, programs, policies, initiatives, and supports that target each student's unique background and school context to guarantee that all students have access to a high quality education. And operating on this definition then leads to great outcomes. So we're looking at equity in action today, particularly in early learning. And we'll show you how we're going to use the funds that you prioritized and that were passed through the legislature. I want to set this stage by showing a film. It's about 4 minutes and 40 seconds to probably be more exact. And it illustrates how targeted resources, especially in the early years, but there's some touch points throughout the course of a child's education. And you'll notice things like food insecurity, how schools can help with that, early learning instruction, counseling, all of those supports that help a student get through K-12 education with the resources that they need. So featured in the film is Ogden School District, and you've heard about a lot of their successes. It was produced by United Way, and you'll see one voice children's choir featured in this video. So hopefully I can make this work.
Seems to be working.
I close my eyes and I can see a world that's waiting up for me, that I call my own. Through the dark, through the door, through where no one's been before, but it feels like home.
They can say it all sounds crazy. They can say I've lost my mind. I don't care, so call me crazy. We can live in a world that we design.
'Cause every night I lie in bed, the brightest colors fill my There's a house we can build. Every room inside is filled with things from far away. Special things I compile, each one there to make you smile on a rainy day.
They can say it all sounds crazy. They can say we've lost our minds. I don't care if they call us crazy. Run away to the world that we designed.
'Cause every night I lie in bed, the brightest colors fill my head. A million dreams are keeping me awake. I think of what the world could be, a vision of the one I see. A million dreams is all it's gonna take. A million dreams for the world we're gonna make. However big, however small, let me be part of it all. Share your dreams with me. You may be right, you may be wrong, but say that you're bringing me along to the world you see, to the world I close my eyes to see, I close my eyes to see.
Every night I lie in bed, the brightest colors fill my head.
A million dreams are keeping me awake.
Million dreams, a million dreams.
I think of what the world was filled with, a vision of the one I see. A million dreams is all it's gonna take. A million dreams for the world we're gonna make. For the world we're gonna make.
So you can see that it takes a lot to go into a child's education, and really targeting resources early on is key to making all of those little other touchstones possible for a student to succeed and lead. This year, you prioritized for the legislative session early learning. It was your number 1 and 2 priority, and we were so proud to advocate on behalf of all of our students for these expanded resources. Dr. Thronson's going to go into more detail about the data that we're looking at mid-year and how we're going to use these 2 priorities moving forward. So remember that your number 1 priority was early grades professional learning. We asked for $5 million and received $5 million for that effort. And then our second priority was enhanced in kindergarten, optional enhanced kindergarten. And while we didn't receive the full amount that we requested, we were really pleased to get $7 million. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Thronson now, and she will walk us through both the data points that led to the need for these efforts and how we'll use the funding. Dr. Thronson.
Thank you, Superintendent Dixon, and thank you, Board, for the opportunity to highlight early learning and where we are right now and hopefully where we're headed. So specifically, the data that we're going to be sharing now is related to middle of year data that we collect between December and February, related to student outcomes in early reading. This is specifically grades K through 3, and we use the Acadience reading test, previously known as DIPPLES, for those of you that are more familiar with that term. Specifically, you can see the data for the last 3 years on this slide. So starting from the left, you have kindergarten through 3rd grade, and where we were in 2019 and 20 in terms of our middle of year outcomes and where we are this year. You'll see significant declines in kindergarten and first grade most dramatically, with additional declines in second and third, with less of a gap between those previous experiences or outcomes to the current outcomes. Our most disparate group is our kindergartners being impacted by this kind of COVID situation this year, seeing about a 12% decline in their performance from previous years. So this is the assessment tells us which students are at less risk of not achieving academic outcomes in the future. They're highly predictive assessments that just help us to see which students we might need to provide more supports and scaffolds and instruction to ensure we can close those learning opportunities. And so at this time, K and 1 are our most impacted grades, and just this is kind of your first shot at seeing how the impact of COVID has had on student learning, as this is our first assessment that's really come during the school year, whereas we had our kind of beginning of year data that showed how kids were coming in after that school closures in the spring that didn't really help us to see the true impact. And so this is kind of the first sight into that, and hopefully gives you some ideas around the importance of moving forward with the early learning work that you have promoted with the Hill this year, and really providing those quality learning opportunities and additional time for students who may need it. So moving forward, just to kind of break this down further into the demographic groups. So by benchmark status, so this is where we say they're at or above where we would expect them to be according to that assessment. You'll see again those major differences between last year, middle of year, and where certain populations fell and where they're falling now. So this compares middle of year data from last year to this year. You'll see as a state, we have a 13.6% decline on average in just the percent proficient. And then you've got our low income special education and English learners. So a very different kind of outcomes. You'll see our English learners have been the most impacted by COVID in terms of their learning outcomes. Special education is actually doing better than students as an average at the state level in kindergarten. Moving across the grades, they are less dramatic. Oh, sorry, if you'll stay on that slide. Thank you. They're less dramatic deficits between what's happened in previous years to this year, but there is still a difference across the populations. Now we can proceed to the next slide. Thank you. This one is progress. So oftentimes we look at our early literacy data in two ways. One is proficiency, like did they meet benchmark status? The second is, are they making typical or better progress in comparison to peers who entered similarly to them? So in this case, you'll see again, kindergarten is heavily impacted in terms of they aren't making the same progress that we have seen in years past. Typically, we get a little above 63% of students making typical or better progress. In this case, we're closer to 50% this year. So we're seeing less students becoming proficient as well as less students making the expected progress we would expect to see, especially in kindergarten. Now the story is much better in first grade. We're actually seeing a gain in first grade compared to last year. And then in second and third grade, we have a smaller dip compared to kindergarten, but a dip nonetheless in terms of the number of students demonstrating progress that would be expected given where they came to us. So that is what this slide represents. The next slide highlights the demographics related to typical or better progress. So you'll see, again, the iteration of kindergarten kind of being the most alarming in terms of the data set that we have. Our greatest opportunity as they come into us and finish this year out and come into first grade to close this early learning need as quickly as we can. You'll see a very similar picture in terms of the percentages. So we'll go ahead and proceed to the next slide. This one is around the pathways of progress as well, which is that typical progress we expect to see by race and ethnicity. So going beyond kind of low income special education and English learner, but looking at how race and ethnicity impacts performance. And so you'll see in kindergarten, for example, Native American Alaska Native students are being heavily impacted this year in terms of the typical amount of progress that we're seeing. We have a 23% difference between the progress we were seeing in those students last year compared to the progress we're seeing in those students this year. So I'll just give you a moment to take a kind of gander across those data points and kind of, and there are many.
Dr. Swanson, Board Member Straight got his hand raised. I think you got a quick question or something on the slide. Or...
Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Chair. Do we have any data based on the different COVID learning models as far as across districts or schools based on that information, or am I jumping the gun?
May I respond, Chair?
Yes, please.
Great, yes. So we are actually working on that right now. We are comparing by LEA outcomes on this data to say, are we seeing, so right now all we have is the state data, but next week, I believe, or maybe it's by the end of the month, I don't want to promise too early. I believe by the end of the month, we will have analysis by LEA, and then you can kind of assume some of that into the model. So many of our LEAs are mixed models, but Salt Lake City School District, for example, has not been, so you'll be able to kind of see how they're performing in comparison to others, but also others in like kind of demographics such as Ogden and Granite. So that analysis is coming and being done right now. The data doesn't actually come in until February 28th, and then we take a little bit of time to actually process that data. So we are working on that as staff, and when we have that done, Dr. Hernandez is leading that work and with Malia up in data and statistics. So we're excited to see what that looks like and to help our LEAs have been asking for that very same data. They're like, how are we doing in comparison to our neighboring LEAs and LEAs like us? And so there is definitely an interest from the field too.
I've got 3 other hands raised, so I'm hoping. I thought maybe there was a question on a slide or something, but we better take these hands. Board Member Cannon.
Thank you, Chair. I just would like to ask Jennifer if I noticed that Upstart received a lot of new money at the legislative session, and I am just wondering if there's been any talk about the possibility of extending the availability of Upstart to the current kindergartners who seem to be struggling, as that has seemed to be a program that's really been helpful to a lot of pre-kindergartners. You know, maybe it would be helpful to these kids who are lagging behind.
May I respond?
Yeah, please, Dr. Thompson.
Yes, to my knowledge, we haven't had that discussion. The legislation around Upstart is a particular age that it's allowable for. It would take a legislative waiver for us to be able to extend that to other grades. We do have Waterford, which is the K-3 product related to Upstart, available in our schools that choose it with our early reading software programs. But Upstart being accessible beyond its kind of designated age span, it has not been discussed or amended to do so.
Okay. Board Member Hart.
Yes, will this presentation be added to SibClerk after the meeting or at some point, or be available?
May I answer that, Chair Huntsman? It will. Board Member Hart, I noticed a slide that had a typo on it, so we'll get it cleaned up and posted today.
Can we also get the end sizes of these groups added to at least to the whole group in the key? Thank you.
Chair Huntsman, can I add to that question? Yeah. We do have a full report, I believe, in your backup, and if not, we'll get it to you, that has the end sizes for all
awesome. Of the Thank you. And you took my question about sharing this out with the field, because I've been asked if I got this data, so I know they're wondering as well. Thank you.
Okay. Board Member Earl.
I was going to ask about the end size too. It's nice to have that on the graph so you know what you're comparing to. And then my question specifically, Chair, it has to do with, was there a decrease in, if I remember right, there was a decrease in our kindergarten enrollment, and what, do you remember what the percent was? Director Thorson on that?
If I may respond, it is, I believe it was 4% that we had.
Okay.
6% participation. Oh, wait, nope, 93%.
Okay, so it was a decrease of 4% of kindergartners over the year, and then 6% didn't participate in the assessment?
7% didn't participate in the assessment.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Member Klein.
Yes, I just have a question. When we have charts like this that break it down by race, I'm trying to understand if we are insinuating that some races are not as capable of learning as others, or if it has or if we're dividing it up into those kind of groups, because maybe there's a cultural difference in their, I just don't see the correlation, because I believe that all races are equal in their ability to learn. And so is there a reason that we break it? Is there a reason besides race that we break it down in these categories?
May I respond?
Dr. Swanson, please respond.
Absolutely, and I 100% agree with you, Board Member Klein, that there is no predisposition that any particular race or ethnicity learns at lower levels or higher levels than another. I think what this data shows is that in our educational system, there are some students who respond more quickly or more readily to the instruction they are receiving than others, and it allows us to think about how might I need to adjust my instruction to ensure that all my students have equal access and opportunity to achieving at high levels.
Okay, so just as a follow-up, to me that sounds more like a individual learning instead of that, and that breaking it down by race is not really necessary. Would that be accurate? That it's just an individual, that we're looking at an individual's ability to learn or not learn?
So
why do we need to do this?
Right. Chair Huntsman, may I respond?
Yeah, Dr. Swanson.
So within this data, I think from a state picture of staff, it helps us to say in our instruction and the professional learning opportunities we provide teachers, are there particular race and ethnicities that we need to consider in the strategies and techniques that we provide to ensure that all students have that ability to achieve at expected levels. At this time, our Native American population in kindergarten, their needs, according to this data, are not being met to the same level as their colleagues across the state, knowing that they're about 10% more likely to not show as much progress as their peers. So from looking at it from a data standpoint, it just brings awareness. Now, is every student in that race or ethnicity performing at that level? Absolutely not. And that's where at the local level, them looking at their local data, but for the state, it kind of informs us that we have some places that we could enhance our instruction and instructional strategies to support our educators in making sure that every student has an opportunity to learn at those highest levels.
Right. One more comment as a follow-up. I appreciate the breakdown by the grades or by individuals. I worry about these categories only because I believe that there are far more differences between individuals within groups than there are differences between groups. So I just feel like we need to be careful there.
Okay, Board Member Hanson.
Thanks, Chair. I just had a quick question. In some of the other data we've looked at, we've seen some fairly significant effects due to economically disadvantaged kids. I wondered if that's later in your presentation or if that's something that we looked at in this study.
Dr. Swanson.
Yes, so yeah, if you'll just go back a slide, and I actually think the slide got copied twice instead of the right slide for this. So with that said, low income is the kind of pinkish color on your screen in terms of looking at students coming from families that are low income. So from the state average in kindergarten, our low income students performed a little bit worse than our average population, but the average population includes the low income students. So this kind of separates them out. We're in first grade, second grade, and third grade. You'll see it's variable, but it's pretty consistent with students that with special education needs or those that are designated as English learners.
Thanks very much. I appreciate that.
Board Member Hymas.
Yeah, thank you. I just looking at this, and if you'll get to this, then tell me to be quiet and we'll get to it. But is there a reason that kindergarten is so bad in every category? And then it's like a bell curve, right? And then you go to first, and first is like, I mean, it's not good, but comparatively, it's pretty good. We're still in the negative there on most categories. What is happening there, or is that the point that you're getting to, that I just need to be patient?
It's a great question. I wasn't going to address it. So Chair, may I respond?
Please.
Okay, so yes, kindergarten, the reasons why we're still kind of trying to dig into it is so disparate. First grade, for example, actually showed huge improvement between beginning of year and middle of year. But when we looked at kindergarten, this kind of lack of growth pattern is worrisome. Part of that is this kind of disruption to their learning. Some of them, the instructional time that they're receiving is less than they would have received in the past. The ability in online environments to really do, really short instruction, and kindergarten attention spans are considered pretty brief. And so being able to transition from one activity to the next in the virtual environment, that adjustment for teachers as well as students may be part of the disruption. It's honestly what the answers are varied and not conclusive at this point. So I won't labor on with like potentials, but one of the pieces of raising this awareness of kindergarten is to help our schools think about, what do we do now? What do we do now between the end of the year? The year is far from over, and how do we adjust our instruction to close this gap, knowing that this disruption to their learning has significantly changed what we've seen in the past in terms of performance, as well as the progress these students are making. We did see a pretty big dip in our kindergartners leaving the school year last year, and they came in low in first grade, but our first grade teachers have really been able to kind of push the envelope there and close that learning opportunity, where in kindergarten we're seeing that impact still occurring.
Okay. Board Member Earl and Board Member Hanson, your hand's still raised. Did you have more? Well, if your hand stays up, then I'll get back to you. But Board Member Earl?
Yeah, my question has to do with, and I think you might have just answered it, but we're looking at all those data points, right? One of the data points I didn't see up there is the difference between male and female. Is there just a difference between the growth element there that might be valuable in looking at? And then, of course, the disruption, I think, and especially with masks, we've got this language issue in that younger grade. And so that is something I think we need to take real serious and find ways to mitigate that, especially where we don't have as high of a risk in our elementary schools. And we have 3 months left almost, right? There's just so much that could be done with that critical time. So those are really key questions we need to be asking and really considering what is causing some of that detriment, or that loss.
Chair Hanson, may I respond to the male-female part of that question for sure? So Board Member Earl, for the male-female, we have not ran that particular analysis on this data, but we could certainly include that in the final iteration of this, in which we compare the LEAs. We could add that as a variable. It seems like a reasonable one to also consider if we're seeing different impact for different gender. With respect to what you were adding, as a kindergartner, they're learning sounds and how we make the sounds in our mouth. Being able to see your teacher's mouth is kind of important. So when I make the letter B or the sound B, I need to be able to actually show how my lips come together, where my tongue goes for certain sounds, and that's really hard to do with the days of masks. And so that phonological awareness that we were building so deeply in kindergarten, and being able to hear the sounds and match them to their print is definitely potentially challenged given the mask situation.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Swanson, please continue. I think you have more slides.
Just a couple more, thank you. So within that 5 million that you were so kind to prioritize and make our #1 request, we are going to have some great opportunities to provide additional skill up for our educators to support students coming in where they are and being able to progress them forward. So specifically, this passing and getting funded. So the bill passed last year, but getting the funding was the piece that we had repealed in the COVID kind of situation. And so this bill really allows for LEAs to improve the quality of instruction to support the strategic plan area of 1A. Specifically, the allocation is approximately about $500 per teacher. So if I have 200 teachers in my LEA, you can multiply that by 500 and you will say, okay, we're gonna get this much money for our opportunity to provide professional learning options for our teachers to really skill them up in the area of early literacy and early numeracy. So that is an exciting opportunity. We have not had professional learning dollars in the state since 2010. So it's been over a decade since there's been dedicated professional learning dollars going into our teachers. And so this is a wonderful opportunity to take where we are and to continue to advance teacher knowledge in the science of reading and that evidence-based knowledge they need to teach mathematics as well to our youngest learners. So within that, We've got a couple of examples of how LEAs could use those funds. So they have the opportunity to use them in literacy or math or and. They can do both if they want. They can prioritize specific grade levels based on their data. They can do saturate the pre-K 3 span if they want. Lots of flexibility and really using their data to make those decisions. So we just crafted an example to kind of help you see what it could look like, but the flexibility here is pretty great. So specifically, an LEA might say, hey, our data in kindergarten and 3rd grade needs some additional support. And they want to set a goal advancing that learning. They might decide, we're going to train all our kindergarten and 3rd grade teachers in letters. We had Ogden School District doing that right now. We've got Davis moving forward in that direction. So just as an example, to enhance their early literacy knowledge to better support students, and then use job embedded coaching to help teachers advance their practice. In mathematics, they might say, oh, our 1st and 2nd grade teachers need help in how to develop conceptual understanding and addition and subtraction. So they might use targeted professional learning and coaches to provide those learning opportunities for educators to impact student learning. So those are just one example of how an LEA might use their funds, and they really do have opportunities. The final slide that we have is just how the money, what other uses are coming from that money, just for your awareness. So there is an early mathematics assessment that will be required in grades 1 through 3. It will be available in kindergarten for those that want it. But if we're going to invest in professional learning, we want to see that impact on student learning. Having that assessment available helps us to measure impact and return on our investment of these dollars. Additionally, we will advance our early learning digital platform. Right now we have our early literacy platform. We'll be adding mathematics to that platform with our IT team's support. We'll be adding an educational specialist in early mathematics to support this initiative. Part of this initiative is to support coaching in the state and offering coaching training in early literacy and early numeracy to coaches in the LEAs to support them in advancing their knowledge. As we build their capacity, they can build the capacity of their teachers at the local level. There's also the installment of a science of reading assessment for teacher preparation. So teachers in elementary, early childhood, or special education will be required to take this science of reading assessment in order to show that they have acquired the basic foundational understanding of how to teach reading to increase our pipeline of knowledge and expertise, not only coming in from preparation, but in this professional learning opportunity for our in-service teachers. And then finally, that implementation support coach training that we will be supporting coaches statewide to ensure that they have the knowledge and skills to support their educators in early learning. So that is, with that slide, I am finished. If there are any questions, I'm sure Superintendent Dixon or myself would be happy to take those.
Board Member Hart?
Yeah, I just need help connecting the dots. How does this all fit together with the early literacy program?
Excellent. So may I answer that question? Okay. So the early literacy program is dedicated literacy dollars. Generally, they are used, 96% of the funding goes towards staffing. So generally coaches or paraprofessionals to support early literacy. That has left a kind of dearth in the professional learning space because, you know, as a LEA, what do I choose? Coaches or professional learning? And
right.
Really want professional learning to stick, you need coaches to reinforce it. So our LEAs went and accepted coaching as their opportunity, and this will allow them to now have the time and dollars to dedicate to those coaches and those teachers and advancing their knowledge and supporting teachers with that coach in the classroom to ensure those practices transition from the learning situation into the actual classroom practice. So that's kind of how I see them kind of dovetailing, is taking the supports and resources in early literacy and now weaving in this professional learning opportunity to really advance practice with those coaches.
Thank you.
I'm not seeing any other hands raised, so Superintendent or Dr. Thompson, do you want to? Oh,
I think Board Member Straight has his hand raised.
You are right. I see it now. Board Member Straight.
Thank you. This is more of a statement than a question. And in all my years of being in education, we do keep data based on socioeconomics. We keep data based on gender. We keep data based on race. But when it comes to helping students, it's done one student at a time. And I think that's important to remember when we look at this data, and perhaps that'll leave some of the concerns about why we we get that other data, because it is important. It does tell us a story, but we help one student at a time.
Thank you. Superintendent.
Yeah, thank you. That was a great a great ending statement, Board Member Straight. Thank you so much. It is about helping one student at a time. I'm really proud of our staff for their efforts around early learning. We are making a difference. I'm proud of our leaders and teachers out in the schools. And this is a subject, a topic that has full support, legislature, our families, all of our education partners. I don't think I've ever had a conversation with anybody who says, oh, early learning isn't that important. It's critical. So thank you to the board for making this an area of focus. Thank you to the legislature for funding our 1 and 2 top priorities. And we have great opportunities ahead of us. And I'm very excited about the work and the focus on early learning. So thank you. Thank you for the time, Chair Huntsman.
Okay, thank you.